there has been so much focus, particularly in the Senate, around the stablecoin issue is that they haven't had time to really fully comprehend, like, what is DeFi? Like, what are the issues related to market structure? Why do we have this like long-standing battle over what's a security, what's a commodity?
This episode is brought to you by Trezor. Trezor makes beautifully crafted hardware wallets that make it easy for you to safely store your cryptocurrencies. I'm a big believer in self-custody. I've been using hardware wallets for years, and Trezor was the pioneer of hardware wallets, and they started this journey in 2013. Their hardware wallets are open source, and they support a variety of tokens, from Bitcoin to the top altcoins and even new coins such as BlackRock's BUIDL. And I'm personally a user of the Trezor Safe 5. It's a beautiful device and easy to use. And Trezor offers a hand-holding service where they can help you onboard and set up your device so you can speak directly to a Trezor representative who can hold your hand through the process. And if you use the code ThinkingCrypto, all one word, you can get 5% off your purchase of a Trezor device. So to learn more about Trezor and all their great devices and services, visit the link in the description. Hey folks, welcome into the Thinking Crypto podcast. I'm your host, Tony Edward, and joining me today is Kristin Smith, who's the president of the Solana Policy Institute. Kristin, great to have you.
It's great to be here, Tony.
Kristin, we were talking before the recording. I've wanted to interview you for a very long time. I'm glad we're getting around to doing this to get your perspective on everything that's happening in DC around crypto. But let's kick it off with your background. Tell us about where you're from and how'd you get involved with government?
Sure. I grew up in California, and then I went out to Washington, D.C. to go to college at George Washington University, and ended up doing an internship on the Hill and realized I was actually into politics and policy, and stayed for about 10 years. And so a lot of what I worked on when I was on Capitol Hill back in the early 2000s was internet policy. We were dealing with a potential rewrite of the Telecommunications Act and net neutrality and privacy issues and things like that. And so I was really into the emerging internet. This was kind of as Web 1 was going to Web 2. And I found that just intellectually very interesting from a policy perspective. And then after I left the Hill, I went to business school and got an MBA in finance, thinking I would sort of transition into the world of finance. And I actually had a really hard time doing that. I interviewed at all these different investment banks, and I basically got no job offers. And so through this process, though, I stumbled into Bitcoin and blockchain. Nobody called it crypto back then, but and I became very interested in that because it seemed to be kind of an intersection of both the internet policy work I had done in Washington with finance, and it seemed to be sort of the next iteration of the internet. And so so that led me to the Blockchain Association and now to Solana Policy Institute.
It's so amazing that you were part of the internet era in kind of trying to get policy and get things going for the internet, and now you ended up in crypto and for this next layer on top of the internet. Do you see any similarities in some of the political legislative things you were doing back then to what's happening now?
I mean, yes and no. I would think some of the similarities include members of Congress have a very low education level when it comes to crypto. It used to be that same way for the internet. I remembered when I was working for a senator and I was trying to explain to her what an application was and what this YouTube thing is and what Facebook was. And she had no idea because she was on her phone all day long and on her emails all day long. But that was kind of the extent of her interaction with the internet. So, it's similar with crypto, right? Like most members of Congress aren't using stable coins to pay for something or borrowing something in a DeFi protocol, or they're not doing that kind of stuff. So it requires a lot of imagination. So I think that is similar. I think what's actually very different is there genuinely was this sort of sense that the internet, at least among people in government, there's this sense that the internet was something special and that we needed to sort of preserve and protect and let it flourish. This again was the early 2000s before some of the issues with big tech, because there wasn't big tech yet, had emerged. And we've never really seen that with crypto. We are seeing it with AI, interestingly. I think there is some language in the reconciliation bill right now that has a moratorium on any sort of AI regulation for a period of time. But crypto was always sort of treated differently. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it can look and feel like money, and money is like so important to so many different things. And but I have been able, I think, to use some of the knowledge that I gained early on in my career to try to figure out how to apply that to this industry going forward. And yeah, we've had some success. So we're not out of the woods yet, but we're definitely making progress.
Yeah, and obviously kudos to you and your time at the Blockchain Association. I think we wouldn't be at the place we're at now with more members of Congress educated and legislation and all these things moving forward. And I think, Kristin, you got a book to write here because you've seen these two major technological innovations, which obviously changing the world, and to have that internet from the internet era and then now crypto and blockchain. I mean, I'm sure a book has to be in the works at some point.
It's definitely not a book. It's a sitcom. It's the Silicon Valley meets Veep, like all mashed into one, and there's a lot of hilarious chapters to it, but interesting stories, I think, at the same time. But no, it feels like more like a comedy. There are moments where we move forward, we move backwards, and the characters, both in government and within the industry, I think are amazing. But yes, it's been a very interesting story.
You brought up the idea of this technology not being very accepted initially because of the disruption of money and currency and the movement of value. And it's, in our minds and the way we've grown up in the fabric of society, we've accepted money to be a certain way or the exchange of value to be a certain way. And while the internet changed the way we did communication and transacted, that wasn't so much of a, it had disruptions, but not so much of a departure from the control that governments have with currency. And that's kind of why you're seeing this heavy attack on crypto, or used to be that way.
Yeah, well, currencies are very much the business of governments, right? And I mean, you look at the US dollar and all of the, sort of thinking that goes into how to control those money supplies, et cetera. And then you look at the regulation that goes around the intermediaries in this space. And this is very much, traditionally like the government's business, whereas the government hasn't, at least in the United States, like they haven't been the source of information, right? Whereas, some country where, the government, is controlling all of the information might have been much more threatened by the internet than the US government. Yeah, money is very core to what we do, or what the government does, I should say. And so, yeah, I think there's been a lot of concern that you can move very large amounts of money very quickly in a way that doesn't require any sort of government intermediary has been a very I think sort of scary thing. And there have been different chapters of it over time, and I think where we are right now, we've landed in like a pretty good spot. I mean, I think the progress we've seen with stablecoin legislation shows that this is not a technology that's threatening to the dollar. It's now something that can enhance and support the dollar and help the U.S. export the dollar all over the world. And so I think that is, obviously like a huge shift. And as we get into other parts of crypto, I think it's interesting. There's been a pretty big focus on stablecoin legislation this year, and I was talking with one of our lobbying consultants this morning, and there's a really deep understanding of how stablecoins work, and there's not as much of a deep understanding anymore about how DeFi and some of the other elements work. So we almost have to go back and do that re-education again, because there's been so much turnover with staff. We've got a lot of younger members who have entered the conversation, and so it's it's a never-ending process here of trying to get Congress and regulators to keep up with where crypto is at. But we do make progress, and I think listen, we don't want the government to move so quickly that they do it wrong, right? And so it's important to have that understanding before committing to policies that are going to impact innovation here for decades to come.
On the note of stablecoins, I mean, the Genius Act getting passed in the Senate, there seems to be not just from a technology or payment standpoint, but a geopolitical urgency here because if you have US dollar backed stablecoins, like you said, it helps the US dollar.
Yeah.
And these stablecoin issuers, it seems according to the legislation, will have to back their reserves with US treasuries.
Yeah, I mean that's huge, right? I mean, I think I haven't seen the numbers lately, but as of a couple months ago, Tether, I think, was the 13th or 14th largest purchaser of treasuries, which is
Yeah.
pretty crazy if you think about it. And, especially at a time where, we've seen interest rates going up in the treasury market, and we see that, there's not as much interest from other countries around the globe. Like we need to backfill that somewhere. And so this seems like a really natural place. And then I do think there are individuals and countries around the world that are far less, their currencies are far less stable than we have here, and they would gladly want to hold their savings and their money in a U.S. dollar-backed stablecoin because it holds its value, and they know that it's strong. And so it turns out that this is a really great way to promote the dollar and not one that is competitive with the dollar.
And we're seeing signals from different companies across the US, Airbnb and Uber and so forth. They're talking about integrating stablecoin payments. So it seems everybody sees the direction the puck is heading and they're skating towards it. Banks are like Bank of America, they're saying they're going to launch their own stablecoin. There's rumors of a joint stablecoin from all the major banks. So do you think once this legislation gets signed into law, we're going to see a burst of innovation?
I think we are. I think we're going to see a lot of adoption. I think when we look at traditional companies or traditional financial institutions, they've been very hesitant in engaging in anything that touches crypto rails because the signal that the government was sending is don't go here. This isn't welcome. And to have that regulatory framework and the rules of the road are sort of exactly what they need in order to come in. And if you think about, I think the US user experience on payments is not that bad, right? Like we can all pay for what we want. We can, send money via Venmo. It feels like we've received it. But when you get underneath, like there's a lot of inefficiencies there. It takes a lot of time. And so if we could move to a payment system that is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can do very teeny tiny amounts or very large amounts. Like these are improvements that I think people will be able to build new business models around or just lower the cost of what it takes to do business and engage in payments with customers. I mean, it's very expensive to do if you're using credit cards and things like that today. So yeah, so I think I think that's probably the reason that I mean, I'm not a financial analyst, but if you look at the run up in price of the Circle stock since their IPO, I
Yeah.
mean, there's a lot of investors that I think are looking to be a part of where the future is going, and stable coins are I think are clearly going to be a part of that.
Oh, absolutely. And I often talk about on the podcast the implications of micropayments and because of the instant settlement and whether it be web monetization being disrupted, paying your toll, or just simple things with a tap of a button and it's settled instantly and there's no lag and there's no high fees. I mean, it would just open up so many benefits and opportunities.
Yeah, and there's kind of this concept that people in the Solana ecosystem talk about of payment finance. And it's the payment themselves, but it's also when there is a lag of time, how can I monetize my accounts receivable? Or if I'm a creator and I know that this video is going to get so many views, you can you know, take advantage of receiving the benefit of that on the front end because somebody else will want to buy, make that trade. And so I think there's a lot that opens up for everyday individuals that is far outside of, kind of what we see stablecoins being used for today in terms of like trading and things like that. So a lot of excitement on the horizon.
Absolutely. Tell us a bit about the Solana Policy Institute and what you guys are doing.
Yeah, so Solana Policy Institute is our CEO is Miller Whitehouse Levine, who I used to be the CEO of DeFi Education Fund. The fun part about that is I hired Miller several years ago, shortly after he graduated from college at the Blockchain Association, and now he's hired me. So I
Wow.
knew I'd be working for him someday, and then that day has come. But we have there's six of us. It's a very small team, but we have a lot of resources to work with the top lobbying firms, the top law firms, the top public affairs firms in Washington to make sure that we're advancing the goals of the Solana ecosystem. Like we want the policies that are being created to have, Solana have been considered in the making of those policies. I think still today, most policymakers in Washington they all know Bitcoin now. They've got that. They know there are these other cryptocurrencies out there. But what we really want to do is tell the story of Solana and explain the different things that are building in that ecosystem and make sure that it isn't disadvantaged in any way in any of the policies that are crafted going forward.
Yeah, that's great. It seems, at one point I was talking to someone, they're like, it looks like the work is done. We got legislation in place. It looks like things going to open up, but we still got to keep the education and the advocacy going, right? Because there's new members, there's new forms of technology being innovated in this asset class. So it's a continuing journey and work that has to be done here.
Yeah, I don't think the work is done, and we can get deeper into some of the policy issues. But I think stablecoin is obviously very close, and we should get that across the finish line soon. But the Senate Banking Committee just recently issued principles on market structure.
Mm.
That is very different than the House, which is passing legislative text on the House floor, right? Like those are very different places in the process, and I think that there has been so much focus, particularly in the Senate, around the stablecoin issue. Is that they haven't had time to really fully comprehend, like, what is DeFi? Like,
Mm.
what are the issues related to market structure? Why do we have this like long-standing battle over what's a security, what's a commodity? I think there are a lot of really complex issues that they need to unpack there, and that's going to take time. And you can't force that. You can
Yeah.
help facilitate that, but people, policymakers in the Senate, they can't do everything simultaneously. Like they can
Right.
only focus on so much at once. And the Senate traditionally really, really likes to put their fingerprints on legislation, and so they're not going to blindly take what the House sends over to them. So I think there's quite a bit more work to do.
Oh yeah, and the market structure, like you said, it's much more complex. There's so many aspects of this asset
Yeah.
class, right? Staking, DeFi, NFTs, tokenization. There's just so many things. And that's kind of the meat and potatoes. It almost seems like stablecoins are an easy thing. It's like not really complex.
Yeah, yeah, no, stablecoins are about as simple as it gets.
Now I read that recently the Solana Policy Institute, Phantom, Orca, and Superstate submitted a compliant tokenized securities framework to the SEC. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, the SEC is a great place to be these days. And for the last 4 years under Gary Gensler, we stayed as far away from it as we could. My very first meeting with Gary Gensler when I was at the Blockchain Association, he essentially accused my entire membership of the Blockchain Association, which at the time was about 40 companies, of violating securities laws and not even giving us the benefit of the doubt. This SEC is completely different. We have the SEC's crypto task force that's led by Commissioner Hester Peirce. It is staffed with people throughout the commission with expertise in different areas, and they have been very, very thoughtful and focused on first getting all the old policies off the books, right? Like they stopped the litigation, they pulled back the rulemakings that were open, they sort of cleaned the slates, and now they're starting to put out guidance on specific areas about what's not a security. But one area that they've expressed interested in is the tokenization of securities. And they held an entire roundtable at the SEC and sought input from the industry. And they're thinking very, very deeply about what, if anything, needs to change within the regulatory regime to make it easier for a open public blockchain like Solana or any other blockchain, to be sort of the rails by which you issue and trade securities. And so this is very exciting. I think I last numbers I saw, I bet it's increased since last month. It was about $20 billion worth of real world assets, including securities that are issued on public blockchains. And I saw a report that McKinsey has estimated that number to pass 2 trillion in the next 5 years. So I think there's a tremendous amount of growth here, and some of the benefits are like stablecoins. You have a speed issue in that you can instantly settle these things. You could potentially trade them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are those types of benefits, just efficiencies, cost benefits, et cetera. But then there's some other benefits that if you bring down the cost of doing this, that means opening up the capital markets to smaller and smaller companies becomes available. So you don't have to be, worth $1 billion to go IPO. You can, be a small business and be able to access the capital markets. You can also, due to the composable nature of blockchains, maybe use your securities as collateral in a totally separate system, for something else, right? Whereas today, yeah, I can go to Merrill Lynch and get a loan from them, but it doesn't transfer to, other companies and things like that. So I think there's a lot of innovation that could open up there. And I think, the United States has traditionally been known for having the best capital markets in the world. And I think that this will bring us into the next, sort of generation of capital markets and allow the U.S. to be the home and the leader for decades and decades to come. And so I think it's super exciting, and it's actually one of the reasons I wanted to come to Solana Policy Institute and have more of a focuser as opposed to working with the entire industry.
Yeah, and on that note, Solana's been getting a lot of adoption with folks tokenizing, whether it be treasuries or funds or even just the retail aspect of NFTs and different things. So that's really great. And on the note of the SEC, I mean, it's like a breath of fresh air. The
Yeah, it's how it
transparency,
should be.
right?
Yeah, we went in and met with them, and you could tell them ideas and they'll give you
Yeah.
feedback. And yeah, if you go to their website, you can see everyone they've met with and all of the submissions. I mean, it's just absolutely it's just it's as different as it could possibly be from how it was before, and very much welcome change.
I don't know if you can speak to this, but I'm curious, Gary Gensler, I saw the man teach crypto at MIT and videos, and he absolutely understands it. He goes to the SEC and it's a complete 180. Everything's bad. It's all securities, right? Do you think that wasn't the real Gary Gensler, but just simply it was political? Elizabeth Warren putting the battery in his backpack and pushing him in the SEC.
I mean, I think it was largely political. You have to look at his time at the CFTC, right? And one of the things he did, he was at the CFTC prior to being at the SEC. And one of the things he did at the CFTC was work to make that agency stronger and more powerful. I think when he got to the SEC, he had that same sort of mindset. He also had, back then political ambitions to potentially be Treasury Secretary or something sort of higher up in the pecking order of the Biden administration. And at the time, the sort of de facto financial services czar, for lack of a better term, was Elizabeth Warren. And so, I think there was some feeding off of one another there where he was like, well, let's go after this thing. And she's like, oh, yeah, I like that. And there was some positive reinforcement that allowed him to go deeper and deeper. But then there was FTX, which I think left egg on the face of him and others who had been openly sort of engaging with Sam and, obviously didn't see the fraud that was coming. And so, the worst of the crypto cases came, after FTX, when I think there was a real effort to crack down on crypto. And I do truly believe that there were people in sort of the small bubble crypto haters, I guess the anti-crypto army of five or however many of them that there are, they, I think they really truly believe that was their moment to shut down this technology, and it didn't work. I mean, I think the industry fought back in a really smart way. They fought in courts, they fought with the elections, and survived. And so, we're here. This it's very clear this technology isn't going away, and I think policymakers across government realize that, and that it's better to figure out how to do smart regulation than it is to just fight the technology head on.
Do you think with the market structure that the SEC will have to create, in conjunction with Congress, a new Howey test for digital assets, or will it be an additional section that's added to the existing Howey test?
Yeah, well, I think it's a little bit unclear how it's going to work, right? I mean, the House has its legislation right now, which looks at defining what it means to have control, and putting some obligations on those who do. The Senate, they're in principles stage right now. We don't have legislative text, and so it's a little bit hard to see where it's going to come out. But I don't think anybody wants to go in and fundamentally rewrite securities laws. I think what the industry, I mean, listen, people in industry want different things, but I think in general, what the industry is looking for is just some sort of clarity that if they meet a certain fact pattern, that they're not going to be facing investigations by the SEC, and that if they are indeed a digital commodity or whatever they term whatever they decide to define the term, they there may be certain regulatory obligations around the secondary trading of that asset or whatever, but that the commodity can freely flow through the ecosystem and not have to, notify the SEC every time there's some sort of transaction or something like that. And so I think it's a little bit hard to know exactly how it's going to play out, but I don't think anyone is looking for some sort of carve out that is inconsistent with the current laws. And I think if we look at the Howey test, the way that the crypto industry has been interpreting it over time was largely right, and the SEC was largely wrong in their analysis. And so I think whatever is done should be consistent with that. Things that have a centralized entity that is impacting the value of the company will continue to be regulated as such. But if that token isn't representative of some sort of equity or debt, then it's not going to be a security, which is probably how it should be.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this and talking to different folks, even Hester Peirce of the SEC many times over the years and former SEC officials. And um, it's interesting because with Howie, it was just this specific area in Florida and Orange Grove.
Yeah,
But now you have these globally distributed blockchain networks and there's tokens distributed globally. And I don't envy the regulator's job in trying to figure this out because it is a very complex one. And if a token's issued outside the United States and it comes to the U.S., how do you even, the SEC doesn't have jurisdiction globally. So, man,
yeah.
it's a tough one.
Yeah, well, and I think it's also part of the problem, right? Is what did we see over the past 4 years? Everyone would just go overseas to issue their tokens and avoid the United States. And that's not the right answer either, right? Because we want to have that kind of activity here, both just from like an economic perspective, but from a regulatory perspective, because if it's here, then the regulators can have more oversight of it if it's appropriate for them to do so. And it's yeah, these are not if these are easy questions, then we wouldn't be having these battles and the legislative and regulatory and legal debates that we've had over the past 4+ years.
I do love Hester Peirce's idea of the sandbox where they're not going to issue a Wells notice, not going to hit you with a lawsuit, but just come in, show us what you're doing, play in that sandbox, and then we'll kind of give you advice on the path to decentralization, if you want to call it. I don't know if that's the right terminology, but if you need to get your books in order a bit better and to meet the standards.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good idea. She has, specific criteria laid out in her proposal, and I think it is something they could potentially move on going forward. I think in general, if you go back to our Project Open submission that we did on tokenized equities, it's kind of we're proposing that same idea, right? Like let's try this. Let's look at it. Let's study it as we go. And then, at the end of it, maybe make some more permanent rules going forward. But yeah, I think it's a good idea. And it'll be interesting, I think, to see what the SEC does, in the next 6 months, because so far they've really just kind of pulled back the old stuff and issued some guidance. I think it will be very interesting if they put out, some exemptive relief or do a more full rulemaking because it will be hard to. It's very hard to change rules. It takes a lot of time. There's a big process to do so. So if they succeed in putting some new rules within their existing authority, forget even having new authority from Congress, but within their existing authority, if they succeed in doing that, that'll be a very lasting framework because people will start to utilize it, and it's just not something you can change, with a new chair or new someone new coming into the White House. So the regulations are fairly permanent.
Oh, absolutely. And then on the flip side of the token, you get the CFTC. It seems they're going to have a bit more, what's the right word here, control of these crypto markets. I know that's something Gary Gensler didn't like. And then you got Brian Kintens, who's up for, I don't know if he's been confirmed yet, but I'm a fan of.
No, he has not been confirmed yet. He made it through his committee hearing, but he still needs a vote in the committee and on the floor. But yeah, he's fantastic. And the problem he's going to have is a couple fold. Well, one, when he gets there, he might be the only commissioner of a five-person CFTC,
Wow.
which is going to sort of test the limits to what one man can do until they, get a few additional people over there. And I would say, I think there is a decent chance that the CFTC has a big role to play. It's a little bit unclear. I think the Senate has more interest in giving the CFTC a clearly defined role, but I think what's going to be interesting is I think where a lot of this is going is we're going to be going to the same place as consumers to buy or trade our Solana tokens, our Bitcoin tokens, whatever our digital commodity is, as well as our, tokenized Tesla stock, tokenized Apple stock, et cetera. Like that may end up being like housed in one place. And so it'll be interesting because on the security side, you're always going to need to have the SEC involved. So I think we're going to see very few companies that are purely CFTC regulated and are going to have this sort of dual regulator. So I think as the policy discussions evolve, I think, there's going to be pushback on this idea that the CFTC is the only place that can do this because the SEC is probably going to end up being in the room regardless of how it plays out. But I do think, I think, I don't want to speak for Brian Quintens, but I think that, he knows the CFTC very well. And I think that he will look at what its role should be and be a really good, I don't want to say advocate, but a good, uh, you know, Congress can get, I think, a lot of support out of him as to what the role of the CFTC should be. And he'll be able to, I think connect with them in a way that's very informative and help determine the future of what that regulatory agency should look like.
Yeah, for sure. I'm very fascinated to see what the balance is going to be and how this is all going to play out. Kristin, with your experience in government, and obviously we still got ways to go, we got to get the legislation passed into law. Do you see government integrating blockchain, whether it be for voting, and this could be like 10 years from now, because I know
Yeah.
government moves slow, even paying our taxes, our IDs and so forth will be all digital and connected to the DMV and the federal government, passports and all that jazz.
I think so. I do think, I mean, look at the IRS today, right? There's a lot that they don't do. I mean, there's still documents that you have to send in via regular mail. There's not always the option to do every piece of your interaction with the IRS online. So I'd like to think that, I mean, listen, these public blockchains are very good ledgers. They're very good at keeping information, and a lot of what government does is keep information. And if you do it in a way that protects an individual's privacy with ZK proofs or whatever else is out there, I think that I think that that's a place the government should be looking. I do think governments are. It's going to take a while for them to get used to the idea of public blockchains versus these sort of permission databases. That's something that has been discussed for a long time, and I think that that's there's ways to do permission services on public blockchains, and I think that's probably where they need to go in the future. But I think we are a ways off from that. I mean, look what Elon tried to do with Doge, right? He sort of tried to come in and make these like quick, rapid changes, and I don't think that is going to have staying power. And so I think it'll be a natural upgrade of technology over time, but not something that the government's going to immediately jump on.
Yeah, and sometimes it takes generations to make changes in government. It just moves so slow.
Yeah.
Um, on the topic of public blockchains versus private permissioned ones, recently, we saw the world's largest bank, JP Morgan, capitulate and they moved from their private Quorum Connexus, they've rebranded it many times, to a public blockchain. And of course, the likes of BlackRock and other firms have been launching on public blockchains. So do you think that we're at the tipping point of folks realizing, yeah, if I build another wall garden, why should I trust your centralized blockchain, right? But the public blockchains is the way.
Yeah, well, I think that as people start realizing that there are superior benefits to using public blockchains, right, as the underlying infrastructure. They're much more resilient, they're faster, they're cheaper. You don't have to operate your own nodes and things like that. And so I do think, over time that this is an idea that's going to win out. And I think as we see institutions and TradFi and everyday businesses starting to adopt them, then I think we'll see the governments come in after that fact.
Hmm. Kristen, do you think we're going to be able to get these two bills, the stablecoin and market structure, signed into law this year? President Trump gave the mandate before the August recess. Do you think it happens?
Yeah, I think that we will get I think we'll get stablecoin legislation done before the August recess. I think Trump's tweet that he put out was incredibly strong. He wants it to happen lightning fast. Like he was very clear. Just send me this bill. Let's take the win. And I actually think that's the right position. If you look at our securities laws, we have a 33 Act and a 34 Act. Like we shouldn't hold up one piece that is very important for consumer protection because the other piece isn't ready yet. Like I think we can dual track these. And I do think though that market structure could take some time. I think that this is not a popular opinion. I think a lot of people will be mad at me for saying this, but as I was saying earlier, the Senate is just in a different place. The House moves very quickly. And they've done a tremendous amount of work on this, and they've come a really long way in their process. But when I go and talk to both Republican and Democratic offices in the Senate, they're like, it took us 4 weeks to get market structures or to get stablecoin, excuse me, through the Senate floor. Like, give us a minute here. We need to take a breath and regroup and start at the beginning. And, they're just now starting to do hearings over on the Senate side. We haven't seen any legislative text, and the Senate is just not the type of legislative body that takes what the other one gets. The Senate usually really wants their mark on whatever bill is passed. And so I think that could push market structure into next year. And I think that's fine. I think this is a bipartisan issue. I think everybody wants to get it done. This is not something that has to go as one big package. Like I don't know where that idea came from. People like to use it all the time, but like I think we're totally fine going separately. And once stablecoin becomes law, then we're going to see massive adoption of stablecoins. And by the way, those stablecoins are issued on top of public blockchains. And so it locks in the use of public blockchains. Like they'll never be able, the SEC isn't going to be able to go after a layer one blockchain ever again. Like they're going to have, this is going to lock in the use of this technology for something on a level of adoption we haven't seen anymore. That's a good thing. And so I think that gives us time to get market structure right, because market structure is really, really hard to do because you're trying to solve a couple of different things, right? There's this sort of Howey test, what's a security commodity issue that we discussed. There's a how do you regulate the spot market for non-security assets like digital commodities, because right now there isn't a spot market regulator. There's questions of how do you do fundraising around token projects, and then there's what disclosures are required, and do you do that retroactively or do you do that going forward? Or there's just a lot of questions, and then there's this whole like, what do we do with DeFi question?
Yeah.
And I am shocked. I am not a lawyer, but I work with a lot of lawyers. There are so many different ways to kill DeFi. You put one wrong word into one wrong place in a bill, and it can be life or death for DeFi. And so I think we really want to be thoughtful and ensure that whatever we do protects DeFi, because DeFi is kind of the whole point of all of this. And so we don't want to, regulate our way out of having the sort of composable benefits of DeFi that we would like to see. So yeah, long story short, stablecoin this year, market structure I think is going to take some more time.
I'm in 100% agreement with you. I think logically and realistically, it absolutely makes sense. Stablecoin is the easy win, and you get that domino to fall. And I think it'll be easier to get the market structure passed at a later time versus trying to package
Yeah,
it together. Yeah,
yeah.
and it's just so many moving parts and pieces of the market structure that like I'm even trying to wrap my head around certain things and talking to different people. So yeah, I think you're on point with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's my full-time job, and there are moments where I'm like, what the heck is this do, and what is the impact? And maybe we should think about this a little bit first. So I'm with you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Kristen, I got some wrap-up questions here for you.
Okay.
First, if you could create your own metaverse, what would the theme be?
It would probably be something about like shopping at Bergdorf's in New York. Can I do that all day long? I don't know.
Nice. Rapid fire questions. Favorite food?
Oh gosh, probably macaroni and cheese. I don't get to eat it that often, but
Nice. Favorite musician or band?
I don't have an answer to that one.
And
I mean, I like
hard.
anything that makes me dance would be the answer to that.
Favorite movie?
Uh, I did not prepare for this section of the interview. I don't know if I have a favorite movie. Again, I think I really prefer TV shows. I recently rewatched The Sopranos, and I'm like,
Oh
this is
yeah.
the greatest thing that I think I've ever seen made on television.
Yeah, Sopranos are great. Favorite book?
Mm, I would say Atlas Shrugged. That's going to sound very political, but I think when I read that at the age of 25, that was kind of changed my whole worldview. And so it's probably maybe not my favorite because it's so freaking long, but it was definitely the most impactful.
I don't think I've read that, so I'll check that out. When you're not working at the Solana Policy Institute, what are you doing for fun?
I love to travel, though I do a lot of that for work. So, but I love actual personal travel. I love going to the gym. I would do that a lot. And then I definitely love to go shopping, going back to the metaverse comment earlier.
Kristen, absolute pleasure. I'm so happy we got around to doing this, and I'm sure I will. Well, I will definitely want to have you back on as things progress in DC and get your take. And like I said, I'm looking forward to your book whenever you get around to doing that.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Tony. I appreciate it and look forward to coming back soon.